In this installment, Dylan Armstrong is being interviewed by Natalie Vukovic on the topic of tenant inducements.
So Dylan, what exactly is a tenant inducement?
Well, Natalie, it's pretty straightforward. It's something that a landlord offers to a tenant to induce the tenant into signing a lease. We see inducements like tenant allowances or improvement allowances and rent-free periods for the first month or two of the lease term.
What's the difference between tenant allowances and improvement allowances?
None from a legal perspective. It might matter to accountants, but not to lawyers. The landlord is basically financing some of the tenant's build-out costs. Building out space is expensive, and an allowance from a landlord gets repaid through rent over time. Allowances assist tenants to avoid debt or capital outlay to build or renovate their space. For landlords, inducements are expensed, and the inflated rent created by payback of an allowance positively impacts building value.
That seems like a big commitment on the landlord's part.
It is, but landlords want to generate rental income to maintain their properties and to optimize investment returns.
You're making it sound risk-free.
Well, nothing's guaranteed. Astute landlords place conditions on tenant inducements. Usually, an allowance is payable after the build-out is complete and other conditions are met. Landlords often insist that tenants provide statutory declarations confirming that the tenant's work has been completed and that all of the tenant's contractors have been paid before releasing the allowance.
You mentioned paying the contractors. What's the concern there?
Definitely, this is a big concern for landlords. Unpaid contractors can register liens on title if they don't get paid, even if the lien isn't ultimately valid, or if it's only against the tenant's interest in the property and not the landlord's. A landlord may still have to incur the expense and headache of dealing with it once it is registered.
Are there tax implications?
Generally, the landlord can claim an expense deduction and the tenant should include the payment in its income. But we're lawyers, not accountants. Landlords and tenants should always get professional tax advice about how tenant inducements are treated. Free rent is different than a cash payment, which is different than turnkey space, etc.
Turnkey space. Tell us about how that is an inducement.
A turnkey inducement is basically an arrangement where the landlord supplies and installs all fixtures and equipment that go into a tenant's premises, or at least funds it all.
And what happens to all that property when the tenancy ends?
You might think that if the landlord pays for it, it gets to keep it. But actually, I have to give the classic lawyer answer on this one. It depends on the wording of the lease. Sometimes, leases deem fixtures to be the landlord's property, but they also frequently require tenants to remove fixtures. It always comes down to what the lease says. Most landlords and tenants spend time on these terms when negotiating the lease, because ownership has a lot of implications, including maintenance, repair, and replacement obligations, not to mention insurance responsibilities.
Are inducements a feature of every lease?
Nope, not at all. They're very common, but they're not essential.
That was Dylan Armstrong in conversation with Natalie Vukovic on the topic of tenant inducements. If you would like to learn more, contact Dylan on our website, dv-law.com.
This audio recording was a general discussion and should not be relied upon as legal advice.